Just another road song, just another traveling tune. They say sing about what you know. And that's exactly what we're going to do here on this Patreon every month. Talk about what I know because I lived each and every one of these stories that you will be hearing. Hello everybody, it's Beau James. Welcome to my very first Patreon special. I want to thank you for your support and your kindness, and thank you for the time to join me here this month. And we're going to talk about a subject that kind of surprises a lot of people. How a 16-year-old kid starts his own wrestling promotion. I'm talking about the birth of my promotion, Southern States Wrestling. I'm going to tell you the entire story here today, how it all came to be, who was involved, who was there to help me, who was there hoping I would fail, who was the wolf in sheep's clothing along the way the first little bit. But before we get to the beginning of my story, let's back up and talk about independent, or as it was called then, outlaw wrestling in East Tennessee in the late 80s and early 90s. Now later on in the run of Patreon, I'm going to be doing a special about 70s and early 80s outlaw wrestling here in East Tennessee with people like Earl Walters and people like Bud Adams and a few other names that you probably have no idea who I'm mentioning, but you're going to be educated and entertained on their stories later on in the Patreon. But we're going to start with my story here, and let's talk about how things were when I started being involved in independent wrestling in East Tennessee in 1989. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was two different worlds of independent wrestling here in East Tennessee. You had Knoxville, in the Knoxville area, where almost every wrestler on the card had been featured on either local TV or was being seen each week on national television. You had guys like Jeff Sword, Doug Vines, Izzy Slapowitz, Jimmy Golden, the Mongolian Stomper, who were stars of the territory system here in the 70s and 80s. And were still making a living as professional wrestlers. Then you had guys like Joey Kazana, Johnny Meadows, Tim Fry, Mark Kyle, who the first part of the week were going and doing TVs for WCW or WWF, and then working the independent scene on the weekends, and were making a living as professional wrestlers. The events, for the most part in that area, were ran correctly. They had a card. They stuck to that card that was advertised. That's what they gave the paying customers. They had a direction. They had somebody booking to do the details of what they were going to come back with, what they were going to take to another close by town, maybe in a week or 2 weeks or a month away. It was ran like a small territory, just on a much smaller budget and without television. The cards were promoted with radio, newspaper, and they had professional-looking window cards or posters. Most of them printed by Bill Needham's Mal Brogan Printing Company or the Tribune Show Print out of Indiana, the big rainbow posters. You knew wrestling was coming to an area around Knoxville or one of the smaller cities within 50 miles of Knoxville because the posters would be out. They would have a newspaper ad. It was done right. The rings around Knoxville that were used for these events were older rings that were left over from Southeastern or Kazana promotion, but were taken care of. The rings were living history in front of you, living history the boys were working in. Now, if you were to take a short drive just up to the Tri-Cities region, my home region, you would find everything was complete opposite of the way it was ran in Knoxville. Most of these wrestlers on the independent cards in the Tri-Cities had never been on television, had never been more than probably 40 miles from home to wrestle. Most of them were trained by someone else on the card who knows how they got started in wrestling. It was just everything bad that you could imagine, for the most part. But there was a few shining lights in the independent scene in the Tri-Cities region. Kim Birchfield and Charlie Peters had a promotion for years called AAW that always did well. They had direction, they ran it right, and they used a lot of the Knoxville boys and the better boys from the Tri-Cities. George Hyatt did the same thing when he was trying to get a promotion started just before I started Southern States Wrestling. He had a vision of what he wanted to do, but he would hit a wall just like I would at times with starting my promotion. And then there was Al Bass, who gave me my first start in the ring when I was 15 years old. And Al, same thing. Al just did not have a budget to run. He didn't have sponsors, but he did some smaller towns and smaller school fundraisers and seemed to do well. And Al was always about making sure what was advertised was given to the people. If that was on the poster, then that better happen, or something very close to that better happen. You had some guys from the Tri-Cities, like Crunch the Equalizer, who's been my dear friend for many years. We're going to talk about him a lot here coming up. Big Al Bass, George Hyatt, and a few others that did travel and go around and work other places, and they work in Knoxville and over in Kentucky and Virginia and Carolinas. And they would just work for the local Tri-Cities promoters when they didn't have anything else going on. Now let's talk about the Tri-City events when I first started. The very first independent card I ever went to was in 1986 or 1987 at Sullivan North High School in Kingsport, Tennessee. We went because my dad happened to see a thing in a sports brief in the newspaper and read it to me. And the only two names that I recognized being read off to me were Tony Peters and Don Wright. And I'd heard all the stories about Don Wright and Ron Wright. And this would be my first chance to see Don Wright wrestling live. If you're unfamiliar with the high schools in East Tennessee, the gyms are gigantic. They're huge. They were built not just for the school to use, but for concerts and all kinds of other events to be held. Wrestling tournaments, amateur wrestling tournaments, basketball tournaments, state tournaments, regional tournaments. They're all big schools. Even Sullivan North, who is not one of the bigger high schools here, had a huge gym. That gym probably held 3,500 people. The night of my first independent wrestling, I counted, sitting ringside, 38 people in the building. There turned out to be a few more people on the card that I knew, like Hoot Gibson, who I'd seen on the Paphos TV when I was a kid. And then there would be a couple of guys on that card that I would get to know over the years. But I had no idea sitting there that night that I would be involved in wrestling within a couple of years, and I would be in the ring just a year later, and I would be starting a promotion just a year after that. That event was ran by Bud Adams, who had taken over the UWA from a guy named Pappy Earl Walters. And like I said earlier, we're going to talk a lot about Pappy Earl coming up on one of these Patreons. And Bud had given the card that was advertised. Problem was, it was very poorly advertised. The only poster that I saw for the event was hanging in the school where you bought your tickets that night. And if my dad by chance would have not read about it in the newspaper, we wouldn't have known anything about it. Now let's fast forward to 1988, the early part of 1988. My mother was in management working for Walmart, who was a new company. Had only been here about 3 years at that time. And she had a friend at work by the name of Big Al, or as he was known at his job, Carl Shockley. Carl Allen Shockley, known in pro wrestling as Big Al Bass. And he had told my mother about his wrestling career, and Al was just returning to his job after having a horrible car wreck that had really banged him up, and he wasn't able to wrestle anymore, but he was managing. And he told my mom on Monday nights, they have wrestling every Monday night in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and I cannot remember the name of what the building was called then. It is across the street from Jonesboro Middle School. When you turn in at the pharmacy, go down over the hill. It was an old grocery store. Then they turned it into a family country and western dance hall, and they had wrestling there every Monday night. So one Monday night we went to the matches in Jonesboro, and we walked in, and I was kind of shocked because as we came through about 30 minutes before bell time, we saw the wrestlers standing all around the building. I had never seen that before. I had never seen the wrestlers out unless it was at Continental Wrestling when the fan favorites, the baby faces, were out selling merchandise. This was just guys hanging around talking to what we thought were the fans. The other thing that surprised me, 90% of them had masks on. I saw a spoiler. I saw an assassin. I saw a Russian assassin. I saw almost every famous masked wrestler I had ever seen on TV. Well, I should say I saw a mask of almost every famous masked wrestler I had saw on TV. It was not the same person that I had seen on television. We went and found our seats, which was not hard because they may have been 15 people that were not wearing masks sitting in the building. About 10 minutes before bell time, and this is something that Crunch and I still laugh about to this day. A few minutes before the bell time, one of the bad guy wrestlers, one of the heel wrestlers, the guy that wrestled as Sam Spade, comes out. Not a guy that would become Sam Spade in the 90s. This is the first East Tennessee Sam Spade, a guy named Cecil who had been around for years. He comes out and gets on the microphone and he says, "Hey, I come out here to talk to you people about something that's very important." And everybody got quiet. They thought it was the beginning of the matches, or they thought it was some kind of big angle or something that was getting ready to happen. He said, "There's this flu that's going around and it's bad stuff. People are dying from it. There's all kinds of sick people. I've had it all week. I've been throwing up. I've had diarrhea. This flu is about to kill me." Now people begin to look at each other, trying to figure out what is going on. He continues to give you this medical update and telling you if you feel sick, if your stomach hurts, you got a headache, you got whatever, you better get to the doctor real fast because this flu is some bad stuff. Let me tell you, it's bad. Like I said, it was a old grocery store, so it has the big silver swinging doors where they would take stock in and out of the stock room to shelve it on the grocery store. They had just covered up the little circle windows in the doors. But as one of the doors swings open and somebody comes out, we hear someone yell from in the dressing room, "Turn that effing mic off and get that effing mic out of his hand." What a way to start the wrestling matches. They drag off the bad guy wrestler who would just give us a PSA about health and flu and what we should do in case we think we have the flu. Who in just 2 moments later returns to the ring as the opening match heel. As he's wrestling, a man in front of me leans over to his son and says, "If he's been sick with that diarrhea all week, I hope he don't crap in the ring." This was an introduction to the worst of the worst of East Tennessee wrestling. A promotion known as the PWA, the Professional Wrestling Association. Now, the PWA was a professional wrestling organization by name only, because there was nothing professional about this, there was nothing organized about this, and there was very little wrestling. The matches consisted of punch, kick, clothesline, suplex. Very few on the cards were actually getting paid, and very few actually cared if they did get paid. And anybody that wanted to run a town, all they had to do was book the town. Then they would get the community ring of the PWA, use it, promote it, do whatever they want to do. That night you're in charge of the PWA. You could be the world champion. Yes, they had tag belts and the singles belt that said world champions. Good luck researching the lineage of those titles, because whoever ran the town that night got to be the champion or win the belt. It would not necessarily carry over to any other town or any other event they ran. I've been told, and through some research through the newspaper, the PWA originally was started by a man named Clint Dixon and a few other guys, and it was a pretty good little independent promotion in the 70s and early 80s. They ran Greenville and Irwin, Tennessee, and small rural farming communities, using it as a fundraiser for a lot of the county schools. And from what I've read in my newspaper research, it seemed to be a promotion that had some direction and some guidance. They would work returns in the town. They would promote the town. Shoot, the fact that I'm able to find them in the newspapers tells you that they actually promoted the towns. But by the time that I came along, the PWA was a mess. It was a social club. It was like a softball or bowling team. They just got together on the weekends and played wrestler and did whatever and hoped no one was killed in the ring that they had. And I'm going to tell you a lot about that ring in a few minutes. Heck, they couldn't even figure out exactly who owned the ring or how much percentage of the ring they owned. 4 or 5 people claimed to own it, or at least a part of it. One of the Monday nights in Jonesboro, they had got into a huge argument over who owned what or who was in charge of what, or I'm not going to lose the belt here tonight, so I'm going to take my ball and go home. One of those scenarios. And somebody went and took one of the ring posts and threw it in the back of their truck and drove off, and they had to cancel the matches because you can't put a ring up with only 3 posts. This is the kind of nonsense that was going on in my home region. I was lucky that I had started with Big Al and Crunch, and I had got to go to Knoxville and a few other places, and everything seemed to be organized. Seemed somewhat, they were trying. They were trying to make a career out of this. They were trying to make a go of this promotion. They were trying to do it the right way. My first night of being introduced to the PWA was stuff of nightmares that left me leaving that building as a 15-year-old referee thinking, do I even want to be a part of this? My first night with the PWA was in the building that I would run the first event in, the Gap Creek Community Center. And we're going to talk about that building a lot just in a minute. But it was just chaos, unorganized. Guys wrestling 2 or 3 times in the night under different masks who everybody in the building knew it was the same guy. The ring was falling apart. It was very dangerous. Guys arguing over who was going to win or lose. Other guys saying, I lost the last time, so I'm winning this time. I can't lose. I got my new girlfriend out there. I can't lose because my mom and sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors and whatever else came to watch me wrestle tonight, and it'll make me look bad. When we left the building that night, I'd gotten in the car with Crunch and Big Al. I asked right away, why in the world did we even come here? They explained to me that they didn't have any other bookings that night and any other offers. Plus, they explained to me that I better get used to some of these because I'm going to have to spend a lot of time at events like this. Not everybody's going to want a 15-year-old referee, and even the ones that do don't run every week. So there's going to be times that my only options are the PWA or some of their guys, or maybe something equally as bad or possibly worse. Which I found out over time that yes, there is something out there that was worse. I would spend several Saturday nights over the next few months working PWA events. I was happy to be able to get in the ring and be a part of the business. Nobody ever treated me wrong or bullied me or anything like that. But I never enjoyed my time there. I knew it was just guys doing it for a hobby or doing it for playtime or trying to live out some kind of fantasy that they failed at in their youth, and now as middle-aged men they're getting to be in the business. There were very few there that could teach me anything or help me along the way. The ones that could did. The ones that could not thought they were and would give me just the absolute worst advice or worst information because that's the only thing that they knew. The large majority of this dressing room was not smart to the business. They didn't speak wrestler, they didn't act wrestler, they didn't live wrestler, they weren't wrestlers. Except for a couple hours on Saturday night within a 15-minute drive of their house. It was after one of these PWA events on the way back home that Big Al and I one night stopped at a McDonald's in Johnson City. And Al told me he didn't know how much longer he was going to be promoting because he just physically was unable to do it. The car wreck that he had been in that took his friend's life and had banged him up, he would feel for the rest of his life. He told me he much rather would just go to an event, manage somebody, and go home. He didn't want to have to be in charge of anything. He didn't want to have to get out, do the footwork and hang posters and do the promotions or anything like that. And he threw out there that he thought maybe I should start my own promotion, which I just laughed at. It was crazy enough to think of a kid that had just turned 16 years old starting his own wrestling promotion. Later in the year, it seemed like the bookings around the Tri-Cities had just begun to dry up. The PWA was running less and less. Al had a few cards left he was committed to promote for some local charities. In November of 1990, I was in the Gap Creek Community Center watching the matches from inside the ring. I was the only referee that night. 16 years old, I knew right then I know more than these guys do. There was one match that was so bad between the masked Mr. X, who we're going to get into a whole lot about here in just a little bit, and a guy named Sonny Whitehead. It was like two grown men play fighting like children. It was so bad, I began to laugh out loud. I had to laugh to keep from crying. To this day, I'm not sure if I've seen anything worse than this match. Probably have. Maybe have not. But this sticks out as a moment in my life that I knew I got to get away from these people. As the night went on, the ring gets more dangerous, is becoming apart, the boards have slid out. Then we get to the main event. It's a battle between two teams both wearing masks. The heel team, two rednecks who had wrestled earlier on the card as cowboys, wearing long wigs under their mask and doing everything that they think a gay man would do. I had heard a story months earlier about them doing this gimmick, and I had heard a story that this is the reason that wrestling in Jonesboro came to an end, because they had went to the ring and were so offensive and so vulgar that the man over the building said, "That's it, no more, never again." I also heard that this same gimmick got him thrown out of a school in Greenville, Tennessee. Why anyone would allow this to go on, or why anybody would think this is funny, I have no idea. Their opponents that night, the Masked Rebels, better known to the boys as Humpy, because the guy had kind of a humpback, and Gummy, because he had no teeth. They were the two guys that put the ring up most of the time. Until this night, and possibly this might have been their very first time in a ring. I had no idea that they had ever wrestled or even thought about wrestling. When Cowboy Williams had the community ring and you ran an event, Cowboy would bring the ring in his truck and these two guys would put the ring up. Problem was, by the time they got to the building, they're so drunk they don't know up and down or sideways. When they brought the ring for Big Al to use on his events, usually Crunch would help put the ring up to make sure it was put upright and no problems. But even putting it upright was a problem, and we're going to talk about that coming up. One of the first nights that I helped Big Al, we were tearing the ring down in McFeeters Bend, Tennessee. And Humpy and Gummy get into a cuss fight right there in front of the principal, in front of the people that was over the building. And I don't to this day know what they were fighting about. But we're tearing the ring down, taking it out, and the ring broke down into 8-foot sections. You could slide it right into the bed of a pickup truck. Cowboy had a pickup truck that had a camper top on top of it. One of them got so mad at the other one as they're cuss fighting each other, he threw the ring bell into the back of the truck so hard. It went through the camper window, through the back windshield of the pickup truck, hit the front windshield and cracked it, and ended up on the dashboard. This is the kind of people they entrusted to put the ring up that could possibly get them killed in. But on this November night, they go to the ring in the main event because that week they paid the rent on the building, so they were in charge of the PWA and had decided they're in the main event. They're in tennis shoes, dirty jeans, t-shirts, and red masks that they had got somewhere. They know as much about pro wrestling as I do brain surgery. The heels do their vulgar stuff. The poor guys that had paid the rent and paid their money to get to wrestle get very little offense. One of them gets thrown out of the ring. He has no idea what he's doing. His feet hit the top rope, and like a missile, he drops straight into the floor and knocks himself completely out. When I left that night, I really thought, deep inside of me, there has to be another way. Somebody has got to take control of this. Somebody's got to do something. Why do the guys like George Hyatt and Wayne Rogers and Crunch and a few other guys that have been around a long time and worked with a lot of people in a lot of places, why do they let this go on? And over the years and over the time, I have come to understand. They had tried, and it was like beating your head against the wall. Nothing was going to change these people. These people did not want guidance. They did not want to be told what to do. They wanted to show up, do what they thought was wrestling, or copy what they saw on television. Don't tell me what to do. I've had 10 matches. It don't matter. We're not getting paid for it, so let's just do whatever we want to do. This was the mindset of this group of people. As you sat in the dressing room at these events, there was no professional talk. There was no camaraderie among the boys. It was just outlaw. It was just good old boy theater of them cutting each other down with gay jokes and talking about their old ladies and just nonsense. Just freaking nonsense. That's why today, if I go somewhere that I'm booked and I don't know, and I'm in the dressing room for 35, 40 seconds and I hear this nonsense, I go sit at the merchandise table. I don't want to be reminded of these days. I never forget where I came from. I never will. But I do not want to relive it. If you come from an abusive home, you will never forget it. But you don't sit around going, man, I wished I could just, be a part of something where I get beat up every day. You want to move forward. You want to learn from it. You want to grow from it. You want to become more. And you want to make sure the next generation behind you becomes more than you ever did. In hopes that they take what you taught them and they teach the next generation. That is not happening in wrestling. Everyone wants to be the smartest one in the dressing room or in the ring. Or they want to be the best right here. If you're the best wrestler in a promotion, you need to move forward and move on and never go back there. Because you've learned all you can learn. Help, nurture, teach. One of the most misunderstood men in history and one of the greatest leaders in the world history is Genghis Khan. When Khan took a town, he would line the citizens up against a wagon wheel. If they were taller than that wagon wheel, he would chop their heads off. By that age, their soul and their mind had been spoiled. They could not be re-educated or taught right. That's exactly what needed to be done with the PWA. The outlaw gaga, the nonsense in and out of the ring, was stuff that could never be fixed with these guys because they thought they knew what they were doing. They thought in their mind and their heart they truly were wrestlers. They were taller than the wagon wheel. They could not be re-educated. They could not be taught correctly. As a teacher and as a trainer, you would much rather take someone off the street with no experience and teach them the right way than try to teach somebody that has years of the wrong way. Because you'll never break them of the bad habits and the incorrectness. I knew at an early age wrestling was going to be my life. It was going to take me everywhere in the world that I wanted to see. It was going to pay my way. It was going to give me everything. And I knew the PWA could not give me anything. I started thinking about how I would do things different at 16 years old, thinking down the road. One day I'm going to start a promotion. I had no idea it was right around the corner. By December of 1990, there was very few bookings in the Tri-Cities. Well, there was none. None in the month of December, none in January. I was able to get on a few places around Knoxville and Morristown. One night I'm talking to Stan Lee on the phone. He doesn't have a lot of bookings, and somewhere it just comes up, maybe we should just run one our own. One time. Give us some work and give some of these other young guys around here like Eddie Golden and Greg Lyons and a few other guys, give them some work. So we said, okay, how do we do it? Well, we got to get a building. We knew nothing about booking a building. We didn't know about percentages on fundraisers and any of that stuff. We knew if we tried to rent an armory or somewhere like that, it was going to be expensive. So it's thrown out there, Gap Creek. We knew you just rented the building. We knew the rent could not be very much, because if it was, they would not be running there. So then we said, who are we going to use? The first name that we knew we had to use was a guy named Carol Dickerson. Mr. X, the Godfather, one of the fake Mr. Wrestling number 2s, one of the fake Russian assassins, and countless other masked personas. Because he was the only one left standing who claimed any ownership to the ring. We needed a ring. That was the only ring around here we knew of. Which sounds crazy in 2020. 29 years later, I can count 12 rings within 20 miles of my house right now. But in 1991, there was 2 rings in the Tri-Cities. And the one that Bud Adams had for his UWA. So we called Carol to find out about the ring. Carol tells us we can use it just like everybody else. But the only problem is, he doesn't know where it's at. We'll have to find it. How could you own a wrestling ring and not know where it's at? How could you own a wrestling ring and just tell anybody who calls up, yeah, you can use it if you can go find it? So we backtracked trying to think of who had the ring the last time that we knew of it. And the answer was George Hyatt, who had been trying to start a promotion running the Elizabethton Rec Center once a month. And he had used it right before Thanksgiving. So we put together the card that we thought we wanted, the guys we wanted to use, like Jeff Lovin and Scott Sterling, 2 young wrestlers we had just met at the end of December who had had their first match for Joey Carrier, who's trying to get a promotion himself started. We wanted Eddie Golden. We wanted Skyfire. We wanted the young guys that were hungry for the business. Then we wanted the guys who could help teach us, like Crunch and George Hyatt. Then we had a list of guys we did not want anywhere near the building. And then there was a list, a short list, of guys that we thought we had to use just to make the event come off without any trouble, like Carol, like Cowboy Williams. And Cowboy was a good guy, didn't bother anybody, but he really didn't add to a lot of it either. And then another guy that teamed with Cowboy, who wrestled under the mask, is the Long Rider, the Widowmaker. He's another one. An intern, he had a million different personas. We started calling around, and almost everybody that we wanted was available. So we told them, okay, we're going to make sure we can get the building. We got the ring. We got the guys. We'll call you back. So now we had the card we wanted. We had a ring. We got to lock the building in. So we told the boys, we'll call you back in a couple of days, let you know for sure if it's happening. So we called Jimmy McKeon, the senior official of the PWA, to see if he has a phone number to rent the building, because we couldn't find anything in the phone book or information. He tells us he doesn't know the guy's number, but he knows where he lives and he knows the guy. If we'll come up there, he'll take us over there to meet him. So the next day, me and Stan go to Elizabethton. We pick Jimmy up, go to the guy's house. The man looks at us and says, yeah, you can have it on that date. Do you know about the rent agreement? No. That's why we come to talk to you. Well, you pay a rental and I get the concession stand. Okay? So how much is the rental? Before I tell you what the rent is, let me explain to you how bad this building was. It's straight out of a Stephen King horror movie. It is horrifying, terrifying. They would have a haunted house there every year during the Halloween season, and they didn't have to decorate it. It's an old school, community school, probably built in the early 1900s. The foundation around the bottom of it was river rock out of the Gap Creek. You went up this long concrete staircase into the front door. As you came into the front door, there was bathrooms right there at the top of the steps. To the left, you would go down a short little hallway into what was once a classroom, or maybe it was 2 classrooms that had been turned into the concession stand. If you went to the right, There was another room or two there. I have no idea what was in it because we never saw the doors open and nobody had ever been in them. And at the end of each hallway to the left or right was a set of steps that went down into the gym. And it was an old basketball court, something like you would probably expect to see in the movie Hoosiers. Everything's painted green, wooden bleachers, ringside seats. As you come down the steps into the gym, you step onto the basketball court, and then you make an immediate left or immediate right, depending on what side you came down. Go down another set of steps that would lead downstairs. If you went down by the concession stand, you would make an immediate right, then go down 4 or 5 steps, a swinging door would open up, and you would cross a hall into a dressing room. That's the way the heels went to and from the ring. The baby faces were on the other side of the gym. Come down the steps, make an immediate left, 4 or 5 steps down, swinging door. The swinging door opened into an abyss, a bottomless, dark pit. You knew nothing was in there, just darkness, until you made a right-hand turn, and then down a long hallway, the length of the building. You would see a light coming out of the dressing room, and you would see shadows moving and hear people down there. You would have to walk down this long hallway that would go past old classrooms. No power in those rooms, no electricity, just darkness. Every time I would pass a door, I expect the devil to jump out and grab a hold of me. Or at least that clown from the It movie. You would get down to the room that had the light bulb in it. One light bulb for the dressing room. And it was dirty. Old tile floor. Just an old classroom. It was just filthy. Guys in there everywhere. The only bathrooms for the people were upstairs where you first came in. So the wrestlers did not want to go back through the crowd. Some of them would just go back down that dark hallway and shoot into one of those unlit rooms and take a poop or take a pee right there in that classroom. And then go back into the dressing room. At the far end of the gym, when you came in, there was a stage. And on each side of the stage was steps that went up. And then again, another set of steps that would go up to rooms upstairs above the stage. I have no idea what these were used for, other than, I guess, probably storage when it was an actual school, or who knows. That's where the boys would sneak off to smoke dope. Or they would take one of those special female fans that came for relations. This building was a dump, a disaster. Yet just a couple of years earlier, Kim Birchfield and Charlie Peters were putting 350 people in that building just about every Saturday night. It's a wonder the place didn't catch on fire and kill a bunch of people while they were in there. And that's what happened to the building. It eventually caught fire from electrical fire and burnt to the ground. Others tell rumors that a local promoter burned it to the ground because they wouldn't let him run it anymore. Who knows? So here we find ourselves face to face with this man who holds our future in his hands of whether we're going to get to run a wrestling event or not. And he says, do you know the rental agreement? No, sir, we do not. He says, well, I get the concessions plus the rent. The fee is $50. We thought it was a little high for the building. But we thought, okay, we can do that, no problem. Make the agreement, lock the date in. So we go back, start making the phone calls, calling the guys back, said, okay, it's good to go. February 16th, 1991, Saturday night. As I called Jeff Lovin back about him and Scott Sterling making it, he informed me that Scott could not do that day. But he asked me if I would be interested in using the guy that trained him, Harold Thorpe. And I knew Harold. Harold was one of the local assassins. Harold was a nice man, and he never gave anybody any trouble. So I said, yeah, we'll work him in. And he said, well, could you use his son-in-law, who was the assassin number 2? This is one of 3 set of assassins I knew of in the Tri-Cities. Okay. Well, they got a couple of guys they're training right now, too. Could you use them? They're called the Tennessee Warriors. One of these guys I had already met on an event for Big Al. They called him Tiny. He called himself the Tennessee Warrior. He was a short, heavy-set guy with long hair and a beard who tried to paint his face like the Ultimate Warrior, except he used like clown paint and his fingers, not the acrylic paint, and a paintbrush. He also wrestled in sweatpants and moccasin boots, like Daniel Boone wore. So we agreed to a tag match with the Assassins and the Tennessee Warriors. Stan comes up with the idea, let's make it a street fight and just have them fight, because if they try to wrestle, it's going to be horrible. So that's the way we book it. My family had a friend that worked at a printing press, so we called her and checked on the price of getting the promotional stuff printed. Wasn't any Photoshop and Office Depots back then, folks. You had to go to an honest-to-goodness printer. Jimmy McKeon worked part-time at the newspaper doing maintenance and washing the cars and the trucks and helping deliver pictures and newspapers. So he told us he could get it in the newspaper for free. We just need to write it up and bring it up there to him. I'm going to tell you a lot more about Jimmy here just in a minute. So about 10 days before we pick up our advertisement, we go to Elizabethton, start hanging the flyers all over town, any business that would let us, shopping centers. I had got 300 8.5 by 11 red ink on white paper. It's February, Valentine's, I guess is why I went with the red and white. Not 100% sure. Then we went over and met Jimmy at the newspaper. I took in the little bio write-up for the sports brief about the wrestling match that was going to be at the Gap Creek Community Center. And we made sure we did not call it the PWA. We didn't have a name for the first event. Big Al had called his promotion SCW, Superior Championship Wrestling. And we didn't want to use that name, even though Al told us we could. So we just called it Professional Wrestling. So they agreed to run it in the sports brief because it is a fundraiser for the community center, because they're getting a rental, plus they're making concessions to help keep the building running. Which I guess it cost about every bit of $8 or $9 a month to keep that building running. So Jimmy starts riding around town with us after we went to the newspaper office, and he's helping us hang posters and flyers. And that's one thing I can say about Jimmy McKeon. If you gave Jimmy publicity to put out for the wrestling matches, he would put it out. Posters, flyers, it didn't matter. He would get out and do it because he liked talking to people and he loved wrestling. The only problem, and we found this out on the first day out here hanging posters with him, Jimmy would tell people, if they ask, was this going to be a good card? Just great. How is it? Any big names? Any this and that? His answer would be, no, just a bunch of locals. And we would tell him, Jimmy, don't tell the people it's just a bunch of local wrestlers. Well, it is. You truly had to know Jimmy to get the way he spoke and the way he talked. And like I said, we're going to talk about him a whole lot here just in a minute. When we figured we'd hit every business that was going to allow us to hang posters in, or the flyers in Elizabethton, we started at the bottom of Gap Creek Road, right off the main drag coming into Elizabethton, the highway that the building is on. And we went up that road putting flyers in newspaper boxes, all the way up from Elizabethton till you get all the way up to the road that takes you into North Carolina. Up the mountain and down the mountain. Now it's time to go home, sit and wait. How's this going to do? There was no social media to plug it on or to get any kind of feedback. No advance tickets. No way to get a feel. The only thing that we knew was the last PWA events ran at Gap Creek had drawn, counting family and friends, maybe 35 people. Cards that George Hyatt was doing at the rec center down in Elizabethton in the city proper, we're doing a little bit better, but not much. We knew it was an uphill battle. Our thought was if we can pay the bills and come out of it all right, then it is a success. Over the next 10 days, almost every person on that list of people we do not want around called either me or Stan Lee. Not to try to get booked, but to tell us they were coming. And many of them were very upset when we told them there's no reason to come. We're not using them. Now, here's some guys that have been wrestling on all these events and probably at some time were a multiple-time PWA world champion, and here's this 16-year-old kid and this 19-year-old kid, green as goose crap, telling them, hey, we don't need you, don't want you, don't come around. In the few days leading up to this event, the Beau James haters, charter members began to gather. How dare this punk tell us we can't wrestle? How dare this guy run our building and we're not on it? Lessons are being learnt very quick. Attention is already gotten. Things that I have heard be told to me about friends in wrestling are being shown to be true. So now let's get you up to the day of the... So the day of the event comes, and thanks to Google, it tells me that the temperature that morning was 5 degrees, and the high that afternoon was 27 degrees. It was a cold East Tennessee mountain morning. Crunch had the truck, and we were on our way to get the ring from George Hyatt. George told us the ring was in a barn behind his house in between Johnson City and Elizabethton. He gave us directions how to get there. No GPS back then, folks. We found George's house with no trouble. Backed the truck up. Around the house, we're looking for the barn. No barn to be seen. Just a small storage shed. Guess that's the barn, Crunch said. I jump out of the truck, go over and open it up, look in there. Yes, it is. There lays the ring, wedged in this storage shed with other storage stuff around it. We spend the next 45 minutes to an hour taking that ring out of that shed piece by piece, putting it onto the truck. Luckily, the temperature had rose to about 8 degrees while we were doing this. We were completely frozen. Get back in the truck, we go down the road, stop and eat somewhere, and just sit in the warmth. And just sit there for a few minutes in a heated room. We were froze. And just sit there for a few minutes in a heated room. We were froze. The man over the building told us we could get in the community center about noon because we wanted to go in and set up. Crunch and Al were going to be using the ring the following week on their event that they were running in McFeeters Bend, Tennessee. So Crunch wanted me and him to put the ring up, make sure it was put up together, put up right. That way we could take it down right, load it right. Next week it could be unloaded and put up right. And we wouldn't have any trouble with the ring falling down, all the stuff that goes on when Humpy and Gummy put the ring up. We had let all the boys know that we were setting up at noon and we could use some help to make sure that the ring goes up to where it would not be a danger and no one would get hurt. We get to the building at 12 o'clock just like we had agreed. No one is there. Not a soul. Nobody. Just me and Crunch. We pull around back to where we'd have to unload and take it through a back door. We sit there for a while. Nobody shows up. Sit there for a while, nobody shows up. Go around the front of the building looking, no one's there. The guy over the building only lived 3 or 4 houses down from the building. So after an hour, we go down there. Nobody's home. Back to the building, sitting there waiting. And waiting. Freezing and waiting. Waiting and freezing. Finally, between 2 and 2:30, the guy shows up. So he can start carrying in the concessions for the wrestling event. He comes and opens that back door up, and we see it, so we jump out to go in and start setting up. As we went through the back door into that gym, the first thing that hit us was that the school gym was about 100 degrees. It was hot in there because they'd had the gas heat or electric heat or whatever they were using running, and the building was locked up. So we thought, man, this is one extreme to the next. There's nobody there to help me and crunch, so we start unloading the ring. Out into the cold, back into the heat. Out into the cold, back into the heat. Until we get everything of the ring inside the building, and we close it up to keep the heat in the gym. Now let's talk about this ring for a minute. I've told you about how bad it was. Legend to this ring is it was built by a man that was legally blind. And the other part of this legend that makes it even better, the metal tubing used to make this ring was once a bridge on a Tennessee state highway. Supposedly in the early 80s, as they went through the state redoing a lot of the county bridges, they cut this one apart in Greene County and had threw the metal alongside the road while they were rebuilding the bridge. One of the wrestlers happened to see it and went back down under the cover of darkness and took all the tubing that he could load up. That's what the frame was made of. But they cut it apart to tear it down. It was just cut in sections. You need a 16-foot square. On one side, you might have a 6-foot and a 10-foot piece that a T in the middle holds together. I don't think any side had two 8-foot sections. They all were off by a few inches at least. The centerpiece of the ring was a Volkswagen spring out of a Volkswagen Bug that was set down in a big tubing with another tubing on top of it that looked like a graduation hat that had slots cut into it for the other tubing to hook in from all four sides. I don't know where the posts come from, unless they were main supports for the bridge. And I don't even know if the bridge story is true. That's just what had been told for years. So Crunch and I had to lay this out piece by piece and try to match it up the best we could. Then we tried to put it together. Then we went clockwise with a Sharpie pen and wrote 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and so on. That way next week when we set it up, it would be a whole lot easier. We spent hours fixing this thing up and putting it together. And during those hours of work, we had ideas of how we could make it easier to do it, how we could fix it, with no idea that someday I would own this ring. The entire time we worked on this ring, no one showed up to help. Nobody. It was like a David Copperfield magic trick. As we finished tightening the bottom and the ropes, the boys started showing up. One by one, they came in, happy they're going to get to wrestle that night. One by one, they went into the dressing room. One by one, they came out of that dressing room as fast as they could. Crunch and I had not been in the dressing room yet because we had been working on the ring all day. We wander down there, and you leave this gym that is extremely hot. Go down this step into this dungeon, into this basement, into this box of horrors. There is one 30-watt bulb hanging in the middle of the dressing room. And zero heat. None. Nothing. It's colder than Kelsey's doodads down there. It's Arctic cold. It's like you're in a deep freeze. So I go back upstairs, and then I go upstairs again to the concession stand, and I tell the guy, I said, hey man, is there any way we can get a heater or something down there? He's like, yeah, I think I can plug a space heater in up. So in a few minutes, he comes with a little space heater. We go downstairs, he plugs it in, and guess what? We blew the breakers. The entire building went dark. Now I'm in the dungeon of horrors in pitch black, freezing. He wanders off. He comes back a few minutes with the flashlight. Goes down the hallway. Starts messing with the breaker box down there. He said, there's another box upstairs. Let me try it. They don't even know how this building's wired together. A few minutes, he finally gets the lights back on. He comes in there and he turns the heater on again. Guess what? We once again blew the heat and blew the power, but this time only to the downstairs. He says, I can go home and get a little kerosene heater. Think that'll help? I said, anything would help. Light a match would help. So he sends somebody to get the kerosene heater and get some kerosene, I guess, and they show up about, I don't know, 15 minutes before bell time to put heat in the dressing room. We've like froze to death down there. And one of the new rules that Stan and I had applied to this card was we didn't want the wrestlers out walking around amongst the fans. As we are shivering, waiting, wondering if anybody's coming in upstairs, we'd go take a peek out every now and again. You'd see people were there. At least we're going to get to wrestle in front of people in the cold. Well, actually in the heat, then back into the cold. But we're sitting in the dressing room, and the Tennessee Warrior, old Tiny himself, starts talking about it. If I knew it was this cold, I wouldn't have come back home from Florida. So I said, oh, you were in Florida? Yeah, I just got home yesterday. I said, on a vacation or seeing family? And he looks at me in disgust through his clown makeup that he's trying to put on in his fingers that's froze to his fingers and his fat face. And he says, son, I was down there wrestling. I wrestled Ric Flair to a 60-minute draw for the world title in Tampa. Which made everybody in the dressing room bust out laughing. Except him. He had just exposed himself as a liar. Later that night, going home, riding back with Crunch, we got to talking about him, laughing about him. And Crunch says, yeah, nothing he says is the truth. That's why me and Al stopped using him. He has all these crazy stories about wrestling all these stars. Wrestling in this place and that place. He was so out of touch with the wrestling business that he didn't even know that part of his story of wrestling in Florida, he was implying that he was wrestling for Florida Championship Wrestling as the story went on, that it had been out of business. The territories were gone. The guy's an idiot, still an idiot. If you're listening, you're an idiot, and you're a liar. Now it's time to write out the card for the announcer, which I did the night before. So I go get my notebook and get the card, and I start looking to make sure who's there and if we're missing anyone. And we are. Some we knew about in advance, so we had made preparations. I'll go through the card here just in a minute, match by match. But one of the most important people that we were missing was the Godfather, Mr. PWA. Also the man that was supposed to bring the sound system for us to use that night. No phone call, no show, nowhere to be found. A week later, I would get a story from him about he had to work over at his job or his car broke down, so I don't even remember what the excuse was. But I would find out in time. His feelings were hurt because his buddies were told not to come. He was a secret agent for the Beau James Haters Club. And if you've read my books, you know all about it. Sometime on this Patreon, we'll get into it. But this was the first episode. So we have card ready to go. We have the most people that have paid to see wrestling in this building in a long time. Because guess what? We went out and promoted it. Still not a great crowd. It's a horrible crowd, but it's still more paid. Because the other thing that we cut out, you ain't bringing your wife, kids, and mother and grandmother and everybody else in for free. If they come, they're buying a ticket. The rule at my events for years has been this. You get in free one of two ways. Your DNA matches my DNA, or you live in my house. In God we trust, all others pay cash. 15 years old, this was not a hobby to me. This was going to be my way of life. 16 years old, it is now my way of life. 46 years old, it pays my bills. It's my way of life. So it was never a hobby. It was never playtime. It was never a social gathering. I've had rules to live by since I was a teenager as far as the wrestling profession went. And anybody that was going to work events for me were going to live by the same rules or close to it. So we get closer to bell time. We have no national anthem. We have nothing. One of the wrestler's nephews was going to ring announce. He's dressed nice, was ready, he was in high school. Had a card, had the weights, the hometowns, and he would just have to yell it out from the ringside. Which I know is terrible. But we had no other choice. Because we had already been double-crossed on the first night. Alright, now let's take a look at the card for the very first event of what would become Southern States Wrestling. In the opening match, Stan Lee as a Sheik beats Jeff Lovin. Part of the problem with Carroll no-showing and not only bringing the PA system, he was supposed to bring the Sheik outfit that he had made. So Stan is out there in the Sheik garb with the headdress and a Iraqi flag and biker shorts because we didn't have a backup Sheik wrestling gear. And I talked about him earlier in Jimmy McKeon. We did not want Jimmy to referee. And if you ever saw Jimmy referee or knew Jimmy, you would know why we did not want him to referee. And I'm going to tell you more about this guy as we go along. And Jimmy was well loved and well liked by everybody that he knew, but he had no business being in the wrestling business whatsoever. He truly believed what he watched on TV was a shoot, and only the locals were a work. As he's standing in the Sheik's corner, the Sheik tells him to wave the flag. Jimmy's response is, "No, they'll get mad at me." That's Jimmy McKeon. Second match, California Kid. Was a young guy that wrestled for a couple of years and then kind of disappeared, and I think he came back maybe 10 or 15 years later and did the same thing. He gets a pinfall over, and I cannot remember the guy's name, and we don't have a ring announcer where I can get it off the tape. His name was Ricky something. No, the young guy was a good little hand in the ring, wrestled for about a year, and I have no idea what ever happened to him, where he went to. Third match on the card, Wild Thing Eddie Golden and Loverboy Lions, the Heartbreakers. Went to a no contest with Skyfire and Stan Lee. Without a doubt, the most action of the night. For all of you people that have seen Skyfire when he was Easy Money in ECW or Jason Jett in WCW and saw all the high spots and all the spectacular moves that he could do those moves when he was 14, 15 years old. An unbelievable natural talent in the ring. Next match on the card was the Tennessee title match that we had advertised. championed the Street Hawk, who is Danny Christian under a mask. And he defeated Ricky once, came back out and wrestled again because Mr. X was not there. Then we took intermission. Came back with a street fight. Is the Tennessee Warrior in his one and only appearance ever working for me, and only one of 2 times he was ever in my dressing room, and the other second time is a story for another day that will be told. As they beat this set of assassins that I talked about earlier. Is what we had advertised as a heavyweight title match. Crunch, known then as the Equalizer, with Big Al Bass, defeated George Hyatt. And then in the main event, Danny and Bam Bam Christian, the Christian brothers, defeated Cowboy Williams and the Widowmaker. And what a mess this was before the match, and what a mess it would turn into over time. Before the match happened, Cowboy Williams and the Widowmaker went out there screaming and yelling, mostly the Widowmaker, who was a guy that wrestled around the area, mostly just in Carter and Greene County and Unicoi County, Tennessee, who thought he was a tough guy and who was real jealous of Eddie Golden and Loverboy Lyons and the attention they were getting, so he wanted them to come out. They eventually come out, and he challenges them to have a match with him sometime down the road with him and Cowboy. Only problem is, he's not figured in to come back to work for us, never work for us again. And he didn't ask us if he could do that before the match. The match would happen on a PWA card, which also is another story for another day, because it turned into something that was a horrendous mess. Fights in the dressing room, fights at ringside. The other problem we had that day, leading up to the match, the Widowmaker didn't like the finish that he was given. He had never been given a finish. They had always figured out what they were going to do themselves at the PWA. Where Stan Lee and I had a finish for every card, and we had it figured out. And if we did come back to Gap Creek, we had returns if we needed to. The house ended up being 53 paid, with right at 60 people in the building. When we got done that night and we finished tearing down, cleaning up, we were leaving, the man over the building came and told us that we cleaned the building up nicer than anybody else that's ever did wrestling there. And that's something I have did from day one till I do right now in 2020. If it's an armory, if it's a school, if it's whatever, I make sure it's in better shape when we leave than when we got there. That way we can always return. Some of the boys stuck around, helped us tear down. We got out of there a lot faster than we got in there. And I can remember getting home that night and being absolutely zonked, just wore out, just tired beyond belief. When I got up the next day, I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. I was still cold, and my knees and my hips and my joints hurt from being in that cold all day yesterday. But I began to think about, you know what? We did this on a very small scale with very little time. If we can figure out how to get more towns, I think we can do better. I started thinking, what's next? What if we could make the next move forward? What do we do going forward? How are we going to figure this out? Just a week later or so, I started calling schools around the Tri-Cities area, asking them if they needed fundraisers. I called the armories and asked them what the rent was and what do we get if we rent the building for how long, and do we get the concession sales. I began to start building a promotion from the ground up. And in just a few weeks, maybe a couple of months after this, I go to the city of Kingsport, who has a huge festival, citywide festival every year. And this festival had been going on for years, and they had never had pro wrestling. And I went and spoke to them and walked away with having an event at that festival, which I'm going to do this August Patreon on that special, because it happened in August of 1991. And to this day is still the biggest crowd that we've drawn paid anywhere. And it was a learning lesson that a lot of people in the profession need to learn. Because boy, I learned a lot that day in the weeks learning, the weeks going up to that. I have a few ideas for next month. Patreon, not sure what exactly I'm going to do yet. Follow me on my Twitter, on my Facebook page. I will make sure to make an announcement of what I'm going to do. If you have an idea for an episode, if you know me or know about my career, about my promotion, or about places I've been and got an idea, shoot me a message. Let me know. Always nice to have feedback. I hope you enjoyed this last segment, and you probably could tell leading up, going through here, I've been battling sinus and throat stuff all week because the weather in East Tennessee is crazy this time of year. So hopefully it's just as powerful and sounds just as good here in the last segment as it did everything else leading up to it. If you enjoy this Patreon, if you thought it was worth the money, if you really want people to know about it like you who would enjoy this, please tweet it out, Facebook it out. Help me get the word out, because I'm going to come every month and I'm going to try to educate you and entertain you. I'm going to give you your money's worth and keep you coming back month after month. I hope so. I want to once again thank you very much for your kindness. Thank you for your support. Thank you for following me on all the other podcast appearances I do. Thank you for following me on social media. Thank you for coming to the wrestling matches. Had several people pledge their Patreon before we ever dropped the first episode, and thank you guys very much, because you hadn't heard any reviews, didn't know anything what this was going to be about. You're just going off of faith of hearing me on other podcasts, and I hope I delivered for you. Once again, by second week of March, I will let you know what we're going to do on the Patreon next month. Once again, thank you very much. Please let somebody know about this. Keep up with my schedule. Just follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, like I said earlier. And if you enjoy my stories here and you like to read, make sure you check out my books on Amazon and at kingofkingsport.com. Also, if you would like to relive the history of Southern States Wrestling, you can do that with our network, Southern States Wrestling Network.pivotshare.com. New subscribers, start your 7-day free trial right now. Then it's only $4.99 a month. Until next time, this is Beau James saying thank you and God bless you, each and every one.